Chapter 1. The Whisper of the Abyss. The Hagoromo chalk bled out a shriek against the blackboard. It cut through the lecture hall like a blade across brittle bone, every stroke of white powder dragging along the smooth obsidian surface with a violence that suggested more than mere mathematics. Symbols emerged, not as static representations of theory, but as living wounds carved into the very concept of order. Equations unfolded in spirals and jagged geometries that resisted Euclidean interpretation, some so complex they seemed to shiver with meaning beyond human comprehension. At the center of this arcane storm stood Professor Alaric Eldridge, a gaunt figure with silver-threaded hair that defied gravity, wild as a prophet's, his fingers twitching like antennae as they summoned symbols from the void. He moved not like a man teaching, but like a man conjuring, his gestures a fusion of pedagogy and invocation. "And so," he said, voice rising with a crescendo of manic insight, "we are left with a paradox, a universe that should not be, by the dictates of our current models, and yet persists. The vacuum should have remained empty. Entropy should have consumed all potential. And yet, you and I are here, burning calories in defiance of thermodynamics." He spun toward the class, eyes alight with an unholy gleam. "Why?" The silence that followed was thick. It wasn't the silence of confusion or boredom. It was reverent, terrified, expectant. In the third row, Adrian Morwen sat utterly still. His notebook lay open but untouched, its pages blank save for a single pen poised above them like a frozen conductor's baton, awaiting a symphony that refused to begin. The storm outside had cast the world in monochrome hues, and the lightning flashing behind the tall, cathedral-like windows bathed the room in a strobe of distorted shadows. Adrian was 22 and carried an intensity that disturbed people, even before he spoke. His presence was not large, but it was dense, like a collapsed star, impossible to ignore, curiously magnetic, and faintly ominous. He leaned forward, eyes wide but unblinking, the tension in his jaw suggesting a dam under pressure. Eldridge's voice dropped into a whisper, forcing the room into hushed stillness. "What if," he murmured, "what if the cosmic microwave background isn't the veil we think it is? What if, beyond it, the orchestra continues, not silence, but the beginning of a deeper fugue?" A freshman in the front row raised his hand, his expression wrinkled with textbook skepticism. "Isn't that more metaphysics than physics?" Eldridge's laughter was soft and strange, almost sorrowful. "Ah, metaphysics," he said. "The ghetto of truth. But tell me, if a formula describes the structure of space-time itself, is it not as sacred as scripture?" He gestured back to the blackboard, now crowded with spirals, variables, and strange hieroglyphs drawn from non-standard mathematics. "Mathematics is not invented. It is uncovered, like bones in sand. And some bones do not belong to anything human." The bell shattered the spell, a sterile mechanical clang that brought the class back into the present with the tact of a guillotine. Students stirred like sleepers emerging from dreamless sleep, some visibly shaken, others scoffing under their breath. Backpacks zipped, chairs scraped, shoes echoed in retreat. But Adrian remained. He stared at the board with a mixture of awe and dread, the way a monk might gaze upon an angel's corpse. Only when the last student left did he rise, not in haste but with slow, deliberate momentum, as if waking into a more real reality. The hallway outside was flooded with chatter, footsteps, and fluorescent hum, but Adrian moved through it as if underwater, disconnected from time, orbiting some silent truth he hadn't yet named. "Adrian." The voice punctured his abstraction. He turned. Julia Martinez, bright-eyed and flushed with warmth, approached with the kinetic charm of someone who had always belonged more to life than to thought. At 21, she radiated a vitality that had once pulled Adrian from his internal eclipse, but even now, She seemed more distant, more otherworldly, like a bird trying to communicate with a stone. "You look like someone just punched you in the soul," she said, falling into step beside him. "Not punched," Adrian murmured. "Something opened." He spoke with care, as though naming the experience would dilute its power. He spoke of chaos, Julia, but not disorder. He spoke of form beneath the formless, of equations that spiral, self-similar, recursive, infinite, a universe written not in chapters, but in fractals. She chuckled nervously, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're starting to sound like him, and I'm not sure that's a compliment." They stopped near a window. Outside, the sky boiled with storms, clouds curling into gyres, illuminated from within by rhythmic flashes. Adrian pointed. "Do you see it?" Julia followed his gaze. "See what?" "The patterns. It's like the sky is trying to speak in the language of calculus. Each bolt of lightning is a punctuation mark." She shivered, more from his tone than the cold. "I think you need some food. Or sleep. Or both." Adrian turned toward her, and for the first time, she saw the depth of what had begun to take root inside him. It wasn't mania. It wasn't even obsession. It was revelation, a dangerous kind. "What if," he said slowly, "our world is only the skin of a deeper reality? What if we're like cells on the surface of a larger, self-aware structure? And what if some of us can hear it?" Julia's laughter faltered. She reached for his hand, and he allowed it. "Then let's stay on the surface," she said gently. "At least until finals are over." But Adrian didn't laugh. He kept staring out at the sky, where a double helix of lightning arced across the heavens like a signature. "It's calling to us," he whispered. And Julia, against all reason, felt a chill crawl down her spine. Chapter 2: The Library of Forbidden Knowledge. The university library at night became a different animal entirely. By day, it hummed with predictable rhythms, keyboard clicks, whispers, the soft drone of printers. But after dark, it transformed into something monastic, haunted. The architecture, once merely neo-Gothic ornamentation, seemed to deepen its shadows. Bookshelves loomed like sentinels. The air thickened with the breath of paper and memory, and silence fell not gently, but with weight. Adrian Morwen slipped inside an hour before closing. The storm outside pounded the building with rhythmic force, as if the sky itself was knocking to be let in. Thunder cracked like a verdict. The lights above flickered with subtle pulses that seemed to sync with his heartbeat. Or perhaps it was the other way around. He moved like a phantom past rows of oblivious students, his footsteps silent on worn carpet. His usual seat, deep within the library's oldest wing, awaited him like a throne carved from neglect. Around him, books formed a protective circle, a fortress of knowledge. But these were no textbooks, no assigned readings. The titles told their own story: chaos and order in nonlinear dynamics, esoteric symbolism and sacred geometry, the shadow of Gödel, the complete Lovecraft, pre-Socratic cosmology, Kabbalah, a fractal lens. He paged through each volume with meticulous care. His hands trembled slightly, not from exhaustion, though he hadn't slept in over 30 hours, but from the rising sense that something was beginning to coalesce. An unseen architecture was emerging, and he was tracing its hidden lattice with every flipped page. Eldridge's words whispered through his mind, echoing louder than thunder. What if beyond the microwave veil, the orchestra continues? Adrian found himself sketching without realizing it. Spirals, interconnected loops, mathematical latticeworks with centerless infinities. He noticed a recurring form, the logarithmic spiral, appearing in seashells, galaxies, hurricanes, DNA, and dreams. The symbols began to slip beyond notation. They danced, transforming into sigils. Glyphs. He blinked, confused, realizing he had turned to the back of an old, dust-choked book titled Apocrypha Mathematica. The pages contained diagrams that appeared to move when stared at too long, matrices of impossible complexity. Somewhere in the background, the librarian's voice announced closing time. But Adrian did not move. Instead, his eyes wandered to the far corner of the room, the section few students ever noticed, let alone visited. The sign read, Occult Studies. Drawn by instinct rather than decision, Adrian walked toward it, passing stacks that exhaled ancient dust as he passed. The lighting dimmed, or perhaps the shadows simply thickened. His fingers glided across spines until they stopped, without hesitation, on a tome that should not have existed in any university library. Bound in cracked leather, its cover was embossed with a symbol Adrian didn't recognize, a recursive triangle within a torus of interwoven glyphs. No title. No author. Just a single word etched in red ink along the spine. The Bourbaki Codex. His breath caught. With reverence, he opened the cover. A gust of scent assaulted him, not of mold or paper, but something darker, petrichor, copper, and ozone. The smell of lightning trapped in parchment. The pages were not blank, nor printed. They were alive. Symbols moved when not looked at directly, shimmering on the edge of comprehension. Languages danced in erratic interplay, Latin, Greek, Hebrew, Arabic, but between them were patterns not made of words, but of meaning. And mathematics. Amidst the arcane spells and invocations, there emerged equations. Familiar ones at first, Euler's identity, Riemann's zeta function, Maxwell's field equations, but they began to twist, mutate, evolve into forms Adrian had never seen. They spoke of dimensions beyond the familiar four, of topologies that folded back onto themselves, of number systems that bled into geometry. His hand darted to his notebook. He began transcribing feverishly, not just copying, but completing. The formulas spoke to him like a choir of voices just behind the veil. They did not instruct, they reminded, as though this knowledge had always lived in some buried part of him, awaiting a key. Time dissolved. By the time he looked up, the library was empty. The lights had dimmed further. Rain lashed against the stained glass windows with renewed fury, as though furious at his audacity. The storm outside was no longer weather. It was presence. And he had invited it. He stood, arms heavy with notebooks, and looked into the window's reflection. A ghost stared back, his own face, yet not. Something behind his eyes shimmered. An echo of equations still unfolded across his vision, overlaid on reality like a second skin. He understood now. This was not madness, nor obsession, nor genius. It was initiation. He stepped into the storm. Chapter 3. The Descent Begins. Adrian's dorm room had once looked like any other, a place of cluttered textbooks, unwashed mugs, and scattered laundry. But that version was gone. Replaced. Transfigured. Now it resembled something between a shrine and a containment chamber. The walls were covered in overlapping layers of notes and sketches, pinned pages that spiraled outwards in precise fractal formations. At the center of each spiral was a glyph, always similar, never identical, drawn in ink, then charcoal, then, eventually, blood. The glyph pulsed in the periphery of one's vision, as if the paper itself was breathing. The floor was ringed with candles, wax pooled and crusted into concentric runes. The only window had been blacked out with aluminum foil and duct tape. Any light in the room came from a desk lamp rigged with red filters and the flickering candlelight that played shadows into monstrous geometries. Adrian stood barefoot at the desk, muttering to himself in a stream of numbers, Latin phrases, and variables. His sleep-deprived body trembled. Yet his movements were fluid, like a dancer entranced, performing rituals he couldn't explain, couldn't stop. He didn't see Julia approach. He didn't hear her knocking. When the door cracked open, letting in a sliver of hallway fluorescence. Adrian froze, not like a man caught, but like an animal cornered. "Adrian." Her voice was small, as though she had stepped into a cathedral not meant for her. He turned slowly. His eyes were bloodshot, his pupils dilated beyond reason. Red strings of equations ran up his arms in permanent marker. One hand held a compass, the other a stylus smudged with ash. "It's not ready," he said. "You shouldn't be here." Julia gasped as her gaze swept the room. Every surface had been transfigured. The diagrams weren't merely advanced, they were numinous. Recursions nested within recursion. Quantum field mappings merged with spirals from golden ratios, mandalas merging number theory with Sumerian cuneiform. "What are you doing to yourself?" she whispered. "This isn't healthy. You've missed lectures. You haven't responded in days." "I thought," she hesitated. "I thought you were dead." Adrian blinked. His voice was quieter now. "Maybe I am. Maybe the me you remember dissolved 2 nights ago." She took a cautious step forward, scanning the symbols on the floor. What are these, spells? Rituals? You're not seriously invoking demons or something, right?" He gave a dry laugh. "Not demons. Equations. Conscious patterns. Fractal intelligences embedded in the infrastructure of reality." Julia stopped. "That sounds like madness." "It's logic. Deeper than logic." He pointed toward the wall where 4 distinct spirals converged into a central glyph that seemed to move when she looked away. These patterns appear in quantum systems, in genetic sequences, in prime distributions, in ancient temple schematics. Independent cultures, separated by oceans and millennia, drew the same shapes. The same ratios. The same dreams. Julia stepped toward him, her voice firm. "You need to talk to someone. You're not well." Adrian's voice dropped to a whisper. "It's too late." His fingers curled toward his chest, trembling. "Last night, the math spoke to me. Not metaphorically. Literally. The equations revealed something beneath their surface. I saw a structure, not a theory, a topology. A web. The fractal isn't a metaphor for reality. It is reality. And I." He turned away, unable to continue. His whole body shook. Julia rushed forward, putting her hands on his shoulders. "Adrian, please. Come back. Just for a moment. Just breathe." He looked at her as if she were a mirage. "I want to. I do. But Julia." He gestured around him, to the spirals, the lights, the layered diagrams that shimmered with hidden motion. "I can't unsee it. I've stepped outside the simulation. There's no reverse key." She looked at the central symbol again. It was different now. "You drew this differently before," she said. 2 nights ago, it ended in a closed spiral. Now it's open. Why?" Adrian stared. His eyes widened. He didn't answer. Chapter 4. The Secret Seminary. Professor Alaric Eldridge's office was not a room so much as a storm system trapped in glass and wood. The walls were layered in knowledge, unfiled research papers curling at the corners, star charts peeling like ancient frescoes, chalkboards covered with interleaved formulas and cryptic diagrams. A brass armillary sphere spun lazily above a glowing plasma lamp. The very air felt thick, ionized, pregnant with revelations waiting to be born. Adrian sat rigid across from Eldridge, his notebooks spread like offerings between them. He had not slept. His hands shook from too much coffee, too little sustenance, and the reverberations of equations that still echoed through his cortex like ghost frequencies. Eldridge leaned forward with slow reverence, flipping through Adrian's work. His fingers paused over a sequence of tensor spirals that mapped quantum entanglement into recursive geometries. His breath hitched. "Where did you get this?" he asked softly. Adrian's voice was barely audible. It came to me. Through the Bourbaki Codex. Through the storms. Through the glyphs. I don't know. I just followed the pattern. A long silence stretched between them. Then Eldridge leaned back. His expression was unreadable. Reverent. Fearful. Exhilarated. You've crossed the threshold, he said. You've entered the topology of forbidden knowledge. There's no turning back now. He stood and crossed to a locked cabinet, retrieving a black leather-bound journal. Its spine was reinforced with steel corners. When he opened it, Adrian saw diagrams that shimmered at the edge of legibility. The glyphs were related to his own, but older, cruder, as though drawn by someone who had glimpsed the same truth, but only through a cracked mirror. We've been waiting for someone like you, Eldridge said. Adrian looked up. We. The circle of cosmic truth. We are few. We do not advertise. We do not recruit. We find each other through resonance. And we meet only when the pattern calls. He closed the journal gently. Would you come to a meeting? Adrian nodded, the decision already made somewhere deeper than thought. Eldridge smiled faintly. Tonight. Midnight. The basement of Hartwell Hall. Alone. Bring your notes. But not your doubts. Hartwell Hall was a relic of another century. It loomed behind the science quad like a memory someone had tried to bury under newer architecture. The doors were old wood, painted over too many times, and the basement stairs groaned with every step. Adrian followed candlelight. Down the corridor, deeper and deeper, until he found the room, a wide, vaulted chamber lit only by fractal candles in mirrored jars. The walls were lined with chalkboards covered in recursive geometries. A strange hum permeated the air, perhaps a tuning fork left vibrating, or perhaps the resonance of something less mechanical. There were 5 others in the room. Eldridge, a tall woman in ceremonial robes, a physicist Adrian recognized from old conference papers, a linguist, and someone masked, watching him with 2 intent eyes. Welcome, Adrian, Eldridge said. Tonight you step beyond conventional thought. Tonight you become part of the recursive dialogue, the fractal conversation that threads consciousness through cosmos. They sat in a pentagonal circle. At the center was a projection, an infinitely zooming fractal loop, like a Mandelbrot set mapped onto the gravitational curvature of a black hole. Each member spoke in turn. Dr. Marin, the linguist, the proto-languages speak of divine recursion. Words that refer to themselves. Truths that cannot be spoken aloud. Professor Thorne, the physicist, black holes do not destroy information. They fold it. Fractally. What we call entropy is merely compression, beyond comprehension. The masked one, the mind, like the cosmos, is not linear. It is an echo chamber of spirals, dreamed by the dream it dreams. Adrian was silent. He was too busy seeing. The fractal was moving. Not the projection, the structure itself. He could feel it behind his eyes. Each recursion unlocking another. Each pattern revealing hidden symmetries between myth and math, between poetry and proton. Eldridge turned to him. Do you see it? Adrian nodded slowly. It's alive. The others did not smile. They only watched him with solemn recognition. Yes, Eldridge said. And now, it sees you. Chapter 5. The Mind Unravels. The next morning, the world was wrong. Adrian walked the university's halls like a ghost only partially tethered to his body. Every shape, every surface, shimmered with residual geometry. Walls rippled with invisible math. The tiled floor repeated in looping iterations. The faces of passing students bore trace patterns, like mandalas briefly glimpsed through fog. He clutched his bag tighter, crammed with papers, chalk-dusted pages, and a notebook warped from exposure to candle wax. He hadn't slept. He had transcended the need for sleep, or so he told himself. Truthfully, Sleep had become impossible. When he closed his eyes, he saw endless spirals. When he dreamed, the spirals dreamed back. Everywhere, he saw the signature of the pattern. The sacred geometry of becoming. The symbols from the circles meeting repeated in the real world. On whiteboards. In the fracturing of glass. In cloud formations. In the way the wind moved leaves across the pavement in Fibonacci spirals. It wasn't hallucination. It was revelation. His head pounded. Not with pain, but pressure, as though something vast were trying to force its way through a keyhole behind his forehead. He stumbled into the physics wing, unaware of how he got there. Students looked up as he passed, some with recognition, others with concern. None dared speak. He no longer looked like one of them. He looked like something else. He collapsed outside the lecture hall, gripping the wall, sliding down to the floor. Equations danced across his vision. Not imagined, real. The structure of the universe was no longer hidden. It was tattooed onto his retinas. His breath came in shallow bursts. Someone called his name. Dr. Weiss knelt beside him, alarmed. Adrian, can you hear me? Adrian's mouth worked silently before words came. It's in everything. The pattern. The recursion. The voices between dimensions. I can see it. I can see all of it. Dr. Weiss signaled for help. Just breathe, Adrian. You're having some kind of episode. Look at me. Adrian did. And whispered. You're part of it, too. You just don't know it yet. They took him to the faculty office. Someone brought him water. He didn't drink it. His hands shook too violently. He scrawled equations onto paper napkins, across his sleeves, onto the tabletop. See this? He said to no one. This is the curve of consciousness. This is the recursion of thought. It's all nested. All minds are fractals. He stared at Dr. Weiss, desperate. I'm not sick. I'm upgraded. I'm seeing what's really there. Dr. Weiss held up a page, covered in spiral logic and strange glyphs. Adrian, this isn't coherent. This isn't how math works. Adrian laughed, bitter and mad. That's because it's not your math. It's post-mathematics. It's what comes after logic fails. It's what precedes structure. It's the seed from which all axioms bloom. A nurse arrived. Then a counselor. Then security. They led him away gently, but firmly. Adrian didn't resist. He whispered as they took him down the corridor. I'm not mad. I've been chosen. And it's still speaking to me. Chapter 6. The Isolation Chamber. The psychiatric wing was too white. To Adrian's overstimulated mind, it felt not clean but sterile. A severed womb. The kind of place where thoughts went to die. The walls exhaled stillness, but not peace, an asphyxiating silence disguised as calm. There were no windows. No corners. Even the ceiling lights buzzed with the flat rhythm of artificiality. Everything screamed containment. They took his notebooks, his pens, even his shoelaces. They gave him a gown, soft slippers, and pills whose names he couldn't pronounce. He swallowed them dutifully, though their effect was not silence but static. Like placing a damp towel over a speaker. The pattern didn't leave, it merely dimmed. Murmured now, where once it sang. He sat in his room for hours. Sometimes sketching in the air, sometimes just staring at the wall, where he imagined the glyphs were waiting for him, curled like hibernating serpents. Julia visited. She stood behind the plexiglass door, her smile tentative, broken. You look better, she said. Adrian tilted his head. Do I? She stepped inside. You're calmer. They said the medication helps. It does, he said. It also buries. Buries what? He raised his eyes. Truth. The recursion. The message. It's all still there, Julia. I just can't reach it from here. Not fully. She hesitated. Maybe that's good. Maybe you shouldn't reach it. Adrian smiled, thin and hollow. That's the difference between us. You want safety. I want reality. She sat down. Tell me what you saw. The real version. Not the one they medicated. Adrian closed his eyes. Imagine a structure that exists at every level of existence. From quarks to quasars. From neural nets to nebulae. A pattern that breathes through everything. We are expressions of it. Echoes. Recursions. The universe isn't expanding, it's iterating. He leaned forward. And once you see the pattern, it sees you back. Julia didn't know what to say. His eyes held a fire she feared would never extinguish. Later, alone, Adrian took one of the hospital-issued napkins and dipped his finger in tea. He drew a spiral. Not for escape, but for alignment. The pattern had not abandoned him. It was merely waiting for him to remember. Chapter 7. The White Room. Dr. Rachel Sterling was not what Adrian expected. She didn't wear the clinical mask of detachment most psychiatrists wore like armor. Her eyes were sharp but kind, grey like fog over the ocean. Her office, by contrast to the white corridors, was an island of color, old rugs, wooden shelves lined with myth and math, and a warm, worn leather chair where Adrian now sat. Cross-legged, hands resting in his lap like a monk awaiting trial. "Let's begin with something simple," she said, her voice melodic, low. "How are you feeling today?" Adrian hesitated. The answer wasn't obvious. "Muted," he said at last. "Like I'm watching someone else pilot my body from a distance. The medication dampens the signal. The pattern is still there. But now it whispers." Dr. Sterling nodded. She didn't interrupt, didn't dismiss. She waited. "I used to see it constantly," Adrian continued. "In everything. But now, it's fragmented. Like trying to hear symphony through a pillow. It's still beautiful. Just harder to follow." "What is it, exactly?" she asked. He met her gaze. "The pattern." She smiled gently. "Tell me what that means to you." Adrian looked past her, to the bookshelf. A volume of Jung, an old treatise on sacred geometry, a copy of Hofstadter's Gödel, Escher, Bach. "It's everything," he said. "A self-similar recursion that links consciousness, time, space, biology, numbers, gods, myths. A fractal intelligence that folds itself into matter. It isn't just around us. It is us." Dr. Sterling leaned forward. "Do you think others can see it?" "Not many. Most are tuned out. Like an old radio dial turned a fraction too far. But it's there. And some minds, through trauma, genius, madness, ritual, tune in." "And what happens when they do?" Adrian's voice dropped. "It sees them back." There was a long silence. Dr. Sterling tapped her pen gently against her knee. "What would you say if I told you that everything you've just described could be classified as a complex delusion?" "I'd say your classification system is a closed loop. I've stepped outside it." She didn't flinch. "And what if I told you I've heard this before, from others?" Adrian blinked. "You have." "Not often. And never this clearly. But yes." He leaned forward, intensely. "Do they describe the same structures? The spirals, the glyphs, the voices under math?" Dr. Sterling didn't answer. But she didn't deny it either. "I think," she said slowly, "you may be trying to explain the ineffable with the only tool you know, mathematics. That doesn't make it wrong. But it doesn't make it safe either." Adrian was silent. She reached for a notepad. "Draw it for me." He took the pen slowly. His fingers trembled. The glyph he etched wasn't planned. It was remembered. A spiral, nested within triangles. Recursive golden arcs. An eye that wasn't quite an eye. He pushed the notepad toward her. Dr. Sterling studied it for a long moment. Then she whispered, "I've seen this before." Adrian's voice was calm now. "Certain. I know." Chapter 8. The Visitor. Julia's weekly visits to the psychiatric ward had become a ritual of heartbreak and hope. Each time she saw Adrian, he appeared more grounded, more like the brilliant young man she had known before his descent into the mathematical abyss. But she also sensed that something essential had been lost, or perhaps transformed beyond recognition. Today he sat at a table in the recreation room, working on what appeared to be a complex geometric pattern. His movements were steady, controlled, lacking the frantic energy that had characterized his work during the worst of his breakdown. But there was still something in his eyes, a depth that spoke of visions that ordinary consciousness could never contain. "You look better," Julia said, settling into the chair across from him. "Healthier." "The medication helps," Adrian replied without looking up from his work. "But it's like viewing the world through frosted glass. I can sense the pattern, but I can't quite see it clearly." Julia studied the drawing he was creating. It was undeniably beautiful, a fractal mandala that seemed to contain infinite levels of detail. But unlike the chaotic sprawl of equations that had covered his dorm room walls, this work showed a kind of organized elegance that suggested a mind in control of its visions. "Maybe that's for the best," she said carefully. "Maybe some things aren't meant to be seen clearly." Adrian looked up at her then, and she was struck by the intensity that still burned in his eyes, tempered now by something that might have been wisdom. "Julia, before I was hospitalized, I made a breakthrough. A real one. The mathematics is sound, even if my mental state wasn't." He slid his drawing across the table to her. Up close, she could see that what appeared to be artistic patterns were actually complex mathematical relationships, equations disguised as geometry. "It's beautiful," she admitted. "But Adrian, you need to focus on getting well, not on these theories." "What if I could prove it?" he asked, his voice carrying a note of desperate hope. "What if I could show the world the pattern without losing my sanity in the process?" Julia felt tears welling up in her eyes as she looked at her friend. Even medicated, even hospitalized, even having witnessed the terrible cost of his obsession, he was still driven by the same quest for truth that had always defined him. "What would that cost?" she asked quietly. Adrian was silent for a long moment, his gaze returning to the fractal pattern on the paper between them. "I don't know," he finally admitted. "But Julia, what I've seen, it's too important to abandon. The universe is trying to tell us something about itself. And I may be the only one who can hear it."